Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, James Anderson, and tonight's guest is Jason Collette, the reigning champion of the American League of Alternative Baseball Reality, or LABR for short. It's an auction, 12 teams. We did it in Florida this past weekend, so I wanted to have Jason on to talk about what it was like to go in as the reigning champ. And I'll start right there, Jason. It was a cool feeling in the room. You were the champion. I was very, very happy for you. I know you've been in that league for a bit. So what was it like kind of going to the table as the reigning champion of AL LABR?
Weird, first of all. I have been LABR combined. I think it's been 13 years. I had a hiatus in the middle there. And then, I've been in tout 15, 16. First time I've won. I finished second. I finished third, but first time I have won. And as I said in the email chain, if the season had gone one more week, I don't believe I would have been the defending champ. I'd limped to the finish line, but I'm glad I got there. So it was fun to finally get Rick Wolf and Glenn Colton back, dropping a ring into the cup like they have done to me for so many years. I mean, they're like Tom Brady when they walk into the room with so many rings on their hand. And it was fun to get that little bit of payback and to be able to throw out the first name. Although, Sir Nick Pollock, I'm still upset at you for not being in the room because I told you I would throw out Cole Reagan's just for you, and you weren't there to enjoy it.
Yeah, you could tell when Nick Pollock was there to enjoy, but his silence was deafening there. And yeah, love competing against Rick and Glenn. I mean, they're great at this. So yeah, man. Congratulations. And it definitely seemed like it seemed like you were a bit more relaxed almost, maybe just because you had the title. I don't know, but
I tried to be, one of the things I think last year too, last year I had a little bit of a deal with some overexposure to the sun during spring training games, some overexposure to some alcohol during that game, and wasn't feeling so well. And this year I made sure I was like, okay, I'm going to have one beer at the baseball game. And that's all I'm doing. And so, that certainly helped, but it was the first live event that we've had since First Pitch Arizona. And I love being together with everybody. And I love live drafts online. It can be fun, but not like it is in person. Not when you can do table trash talk and, make cracks about your team being, barely over 18 years old, average age kind of stuff. All those jokes. It's just fun to have. It should be fun. I mean, we're all trying to win. It's all serious, but this should also be fun. We can't forget that.
It was a lot of fun. There's always some kind of kicking yourself for this or that, but I mean, it always ends up being a blast. Any kind of live auction. So, what were some of the things that worked well for you the year you won, and that maybe you tried to replicate or kind of carry into this year?
So one of the things when I looked back at last year and how I did well, going into the draft, and one of the things I did, and the funny thing is I had the exact same strategy in tout and I finished 7th there. So it wasn't like it was a guarantee, but I was worried about the run environment and how stolen bases were going to influence ERA. And so I made it a point with my teams last year to emphasize pitching more than I ever have. And the problem when I sat back and looked at it when I was prepping for this year's draft, I've looked at the last 3 years and I'm like, man, my offense has sucked every year. I mean, last year I knew it was going to suck because I was going to spend over $100 on pitching and I had to hit all the margins and I missed on some. I also released Chas McCormick a week before he got the job and when Yordan Alvarez went down. Had I not done that, it may have been a little different. But I have struggled to put together competitive offenses for one reason or another. But at the same time, I didn't want to stray too far from hey, I just did really well in pitching by emphasizing pitching. And I want to make sure that I don't want to swing in the exact opposite direction there. So I came into the room wanting to compromise, be like, okay, I'm not going to spend over $100, but I'm also not going to go $200 hitting and 60 on pitching, or do what Andy Andres did and go like 235, 25. Like I wanted to find a happy medium there, but not straying too far from what helped me do well in just about all my other leagues. Like I won a draft and hold. I finished third in another one. So I had a very good year overall. And it was because of the emphasis that I put on pitching last year. That said, I knew I needed offense coming into the draft this year.
Yeah. I mean, it was, we're going to talk about that Andy Andres strategy, because that was definitely affected things.
Mhm.
And I might have been too slow to kind of realize it happened. But well, actually, let's talk about it right now.
Okay.
So like you said, man, he spent, I don't have the exact dollar figure.
I think it was like somewhere around 230. It was something close to $230.
Yeah. So his most expensive pitcher was Garrett Whitlock, the Red Sox. Shane Baz, he got for $4 as his second most expensive pitcher. Obviously with the Rays. So, when a player does something like that, goes that far in one direction, obviously it's gonna kind of skew things, and there's going to be hitters that go for more than you were expecting, and there's going to be pitchers that go for less than you're expecting. And how quickly did you kind of figure out what he was doing, and were you kind of able to make those adjustments on the fly?
So I guess I had a couple of benefits. One, he was sitting directly across from me, so it was like I could pay it. He was the player nominating people before me, so I was able to pay attention, and I noticed it was hitter, and he wasn't even bidding on pitching. And in fact, I made a note the first time he bid on a pitcher is I think I threw out Nick Pivetta at 8 and he said 9. I said 10 and he stopped. So once that happened, I was like, okay, there's a guy who's a Boston fan who likes Nick Pivetta and is not willing to go double digits on a pitcher. He's not buying pitching in this. And so I figured, this was where that was going to go in that capacity. So, and plus he did this last year in tout. Now imagine, typically you have one guy that does that in the league. Well, last year in tout, you had Doug Dennis, who was, goes heavy on offense because no innings limit in tout. And he goes a lot of relievers, which doesn't cost him too much money. And then you had Andy doing the same thing. But there were a couple of times, I don't know if you caught on to it, where like he wasn't just one-upping bids. He was +4, +5. And I'm trying to remember, I think it was Jose Ramirez. Like I can't see what the exact price was, but I know he went up $5 and everybody was like, I think somebody said like 28, 25, and he's just like 33, 34. And he was like being super aggressive. So I figured, all right, he's going to do what he did in tout. I know it's a different scoring format, but he finished second place last year in tout doing this. And I figured, that's what he was going to try here. But again, once he wouldn't go to double digits on a pitcher I knew he liked, that's when I knew this was going to be a very heavy offensive draft for him.
Yeah, that was savvy by you to pick up on that. And yeah, he got Ramirez for $35. He got Bobby Witt for $45. Juan Soto for $40. So I mean, that's a lot of high end spending for an only league, obviously.
Yeah, he wasn't messing around. I mean, obviously there's because it's a trade league, there's a couple of natural trade partners. I think you're one of them. I thought Chris Clegg is a trade partner in talking with Chris because he said he bought an extra pitcher he really didn't want to buy along those lines. So I feel like Andy's got some natural trade partners. It kind of reminds me of the year that I bought too much pitching and traded Garrett Cole to Ian Kahn for Vladimir Guerrero Jr., like right after the draft. We're talking like that night. Didn't even get a chance to get used on my roster because we just looked at one another and we're like, man, this is a real natural fit. Still didn't help my offense that year. I still had a terrible offense, but it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, well, I'm going to wait a little bit before getting into the trade waters. And I didn't necessarily set myself up in the reserve rounds to, I got Paul Blackburn as my one reserve pitcher with the A's. I think he'll be fine in home starts at least. And it's nice to be able to move him back and forth for those starts. But yeah, so I ended up I think you say Kikuchi is where I screwed up. I got Kikuchi for $8. And I was talking with Rick Wolf afterwards, and I was just lamenting I basically price enforced on Kikuchi and then just got stuck with him. And, it was a mistake because it was so late in the auction that I shouldn't have been worried about what anyone was really getting sold for. I should have been worried about my team and the holes on my team that I needed. So I think that the prices on the pitching side, it's just kind of like, oh man, I like that price. I like that price. And then before you know it, you bought too many and you're in trouble. So just always, and that actually happened to me in my other most recent auction too. It's just something I would definitely say is, keep an eye on what's happening with the prices of starting pitching in general, kind of right away, but into the middle and later on, because that is one area, unless you're trying to go in specifically to go super cheap on pitching, you do kind of really want to thread that needle, right, if you can, in the auction room.
Right. I mean, to be fair, I believe I was the guy that was pushing you up on Kikuchi. He was on my list. I think I said 7. I know I was active in on that bidding because he is somebody that I'd liked in the single digit price. But at the end of the day, I'd let you have him. And it wasn't because I looked at your roster and be like, ooh, he really probably doesn't want this pitcher. Let me go ahead and have him. It was, I had a price. We got to that price and I wasn't willing to go over for him. So I moved on to the next guy.
So we talked about Andy's strategy with the kind of going heavy on hitting and really light on pitching. Did anything else about this auction stand out as like kind of different to you, or did the rest of it seem fairly normal?
I mean, honestly, the rest of it seemed fairly normal. In talking, the next day we learned that, Chris Clegg had never done an auction before. He had always drafted. And honestly, it didn't really show. I thought he held him, carried himself rather well at the table, not for having never auctioned, because I remember my first industry auction and I was like nervous as all get out. And I was buying everybody left and right. And then all of a sudden I was like, I don't have any money and I have 14 more roster spots to fill. And so, but he didn't find himself in that type of situation. I mean, there were a couple of players, like I was surprised that Vaughn Grissom almost hit $20. And, there were a couple of other players that was a little surprised on how low they went. But, for the most part, it played out once we looked at like, okay, Andy's going to be Andy. But there wasn't the other end of that. Like Chris did buy some pitching, but it wasn't too extreme. We didn't have 2 extremes. We had one hitting extreme and a little bit of pitching extreme, but not it didn't offset the hitting side.
So when you go into an auction like this, obviously you like you said, you've been doing this for a while. Do you have kind of a narrower scope of players that you are trying to get, or are you open to the majority of the pool at certain prices?
We talked a little bit about this for those that were on site in Florida. Ron Chandler's talked about this as total control drafting, but there is a set of skills that I'd like to look for in hitters and pitchers. And so I focus on those. I will go through and look at if a guy's struggling to make certain kind of contact, like Javi Baez, even at the right price, is never going to find his way on my roster. It's just not going to happen. But I have certain, maybe it's a blind spot or a bias, but there are certain things I like to look for in players. And so I will narrow the player pool to that. And then I start looking for groupings. And I talk about this. I wrote my draft recap and went up on the site earlier, a couple hours ago. And I look for how I can group players. And the best example I can think of right now is Adolis Garcia, Randy Arozarena, and Luis Robert Jr. Those 3 are essentially the same fantasy player. And they went 30, 30, and 29 in this event, right? And so the room thought the same thing too, but those are the same guys. And so Adolis Garcia went first. Randy went next. I had a $30 outfield spot on my roster. That's what I was looking for. And Adolis went to 30. I had said 29, and I think it was Dave Adler went to 30. I did not go 31. Then we got to Arozarena. I was in the even numbers. I got the 30. Nobody said 31. I won. What I didn't want to do was get down to Luis Robert because he was the last guy in that bucket that I liked. And then I'm paying more for a guy just because he's the last guy. So I won't reach for the first guy, but I don't want to be in a spot where I'm reaching for the last guy. So again, I narrow the player pool down to a certain set of skills that I like. And then I start grouping people together where I think they belong, because I also budget by roster spot. So I will go in and say, I want to spend this much on catcher 1, this much on catcher 2. And I put dollar amounts by every position. And then I put about $10 in utility. And that's kind of like my emergency fund. If I need to go there, I can go there and move it around. But I don't like to budget every single dollar to a specific position. I'll budget $250 and I put 10 in the utility spot as my emergency fund. If I need to go dip into it, I can. But if I find a value, then I can add to that emergency fund. Now I got $12 to play with. And so that's a strategy that I've used for a number of years.
Yeah, I think it worked out well for you, getting Randy Arozarena for the price that you did. I mean, I think he of those guys, I think he's kind of like the safest bet for 20 steals or 20 plus steals. And my history in this league, it always seems like speed is the one thing you can kind of count on to get pushed up in the auction. I know Larry Schechter was really aggressive with that last year.
And Sean Childs, who's not in it anymore, but Sean was always like it would have been fun to watch Andy and Sean get the bidding war for Bobby Witt, because last year that was the guy that Sean wanted, and he would buy last year. Like, he cornered that market, and he won steals by like 45 because he had a Sturry Ruiz and he had Witt, and like Andy had another guy, and it was like the rest of us were just like playing for second and steals about 20 minutes into the draft.
So I mean, you kind of talked about this a little bit, but this is like the one note I made during the auction of like, because I knew I was going to have you on, and the one thing I knew I definitely wanted to ask you about was you filled up your outfield first, and I didn't really think that much of it right at the time, but then when you kind of saw how the rest of the outfield pool was getting bid up, once we kind of got down to 15 to 20 no doubt starter outfielders, people started to get desperate because people started to say, well, shoot, I need 3 outfielders or I need 4 outfielders. And so you're sitting there with your outfield basically full. You have Arozarena for 30, Santander with the O's for 19, Varsho with the Jays for 14, Kerry Carpenter with the Tigers for 13, and Andrew Benintendi, obviously going back to the White Sox for 8. That's all those guys are going to start. All those guys, maybe Varsho maybe gets platooned a little, Carpenter maybe gets platooned a little, but generally those guys are starting outfielders. You fill that all up. Was that like, because that seemed like a position of power to me where you didn't have to worry about outfield anymore and you could kind of look for values on the infield.
Yeah, so when I was going back to look at where I started, so Varsho was the first player that first outfielder that I rostered, and quite frankly was not a target, but he was at $10, and it was slow counting, and I don't like to do like $1 up things, so it was like 7, 9, 10. I said 14 because I had him valued higher. My value for him when I was looking, my value for him was 21. I really like Dalton Varsho this year in a standard format, especially in a year 2 that he's got the comfort level. And so I just said 14 to push him along, and the room stopped. So I'm like, okay, cool. So now I can take the money that I had budgeted because I had a $20 outfield spot. So he went into that, and I was able to move that extra 3 into my emergency fund. And then Arozarena, like I said, I had the 3. Adolis Garcia had already gone. And if I didn't get Arozarena, I would have gone Luis Robert, who went 4 picks after Arozarena. So that trio was gone off the table. Then Kerry Carpenter, and Kerry Carpenter was a price. Santander was a guy that was that I had slotted that I really liked in that area as well. So I had 4 outfielders by the 87th nomination. Then Andrew Benintendi, I waited almost 100 picks because, like you said, then you saw Tyler O'Neill going 17. I like Ton. I really do, but I wasn't going 18. I think I said 16 to push Rick and Glenn. And then you got, Stephen Kwan went 16, Austin Hayes 10, Chas McCormick 19, Taylor Ward 18. I waited all that out, and I went after Benintendi super late because I continue to find this guy sitting around in the reserves and snake drafts and cheap. He's going to hit leadoff. He's going to get a lot of playing time. He could have 600 and something plate appearances, and he's going single digits in AL only auctions. He's going reserve rounds in a 15 team mixed format, and so he's been a target just because of the market price. I think the White Sox, to quote my good friend Craig, the White Sox hatred's gone a bit too far, and so Benintendi, Eloy Jimenez, especially Jimenez. I think Jimenez went 15 in here. And I almost threw Jimenez out as the first player because I want to say, okay, who wants to have the utility clogged and lose that flexibility? Because we don't, when we play tout, it's a non-factor because we have 2 utility spots now. So it doesn't matter. But here, it's a factor. And I almost threw Jimenez out as the first player just to see, okay, how is that going to make somebody inflexible?
Yeah, and for those that are looking at the screen, Jason's team is the one at the far left. So the team that starts with Heim and Knizner at catcher. Yeah, man, that outfield's loaded. Benintendi, you know, the ceiling seems to be just like so low to me that I am not interested in like shallower formats, but he's a perfect only league player because, you know, a big part of it is just compiling plate appearances, and like, you know, those are locked in for him.
And that's where my offenses have fallen short. I've taken chances. You know, last year I had Kyle Tucker carry me offensively, but because I spent 155 on hitting and Kyle Tucker was 37 of that, like I had to take chances in other places. And when you take chances, you're taking risk on playing time. But I can look at that outfield and say, you know, I have a good chance of getting 2,500 plus at bats there, and that's going to get me a good way. They're going to have to carry me because I do have some other. Nobody's got a perfect team, but my outfield is definitely the strength of my team.
Was there anything like a player or a position or anything that you just wish you had a mulligan on, or you wish you just could do it differently? Or like you said, I mean, you're not going to be able to put together the perfect team.
Right. I mean, there's a couple of things. Yeah, my plan at catcher was not to have the Rangers duo. Like I wanted Jonah Heim. I wanted a better second catcher. But at the time when some of these other guys were coming out, Rene Pinto ended up going, I think, like $6-7. I didn't have the money to do that. And so this is where I ended up with things. And so that's fine. I just, overall, there's definitely a theme of risk. I look at Anthony Rizzo and I look at how well Anthony Rizzo was hitting for the Yankees before the misdiagnosed concussion last year. I look at the fact that he's going to be hitting cleanup behind LeMahieu, Soto, and Judge, and there's a golden opportunity for him to do extremely well out of that spot. Trevor Story is probably the one guy. I mean, I can live with Stanton at a single-digit price. It's that's home runs. I needed that, but I paid a pretty big price for Trevor Story, and in hindsight, I wish I would have been able to step back a little bit and maybe take J.P. Crawford at 11 and use that $5 for Story somewhere else. So Story was really the one player because of the price. I mean, you may be looking at the roster going, man, why did you draft Anthony Rendon? Well, again, he's $5, and he's going to hit cleanup for the Angels when he does play. At $5 for a cleanup hitter, I'm going to take that. I don't care who it is. I just need him to show he's already got a groin that's a little sore, so hopefully that's getting behind him. So I do have some risk. Health grades probably is not the greatest, but I think Story is the one guy I would like to have a mulligan on because I could have used that money elsewhere.
Yeah, I was the J.P. Crawford at 11 buyer, but that was really the only middle infield price that I felt good about it. It felt like, we talked about how it seemed like hitting was more expensive, obviously, because we had one team spending more money than anticipated on hitting. But the middle infield prices, I end up with Andres Jimenez for 26, but that was pretty expensive because that's the same price as Jose Altuve at 26 and Gleyber Torres at 26. And it just, it's like, should I have gone an extra couple dollars on Altuve or Torres? Because it's not a guarantee that if you say 27, it stops at 27.
Exactly.
And I wanted the speed that Jimenez provides. I've always been light on speed in this league, and so I just, but yeah, it did seem like if you wanted a player like Trevor Story, infielder with the potential to steal 20 plus bases, it was going to cost you in this auction. Let's see here. Were there a few players that you if you predicted before the auction, a few players you ended up with that you would not have been surprised at all to know that you ended up with? And I'll exclude Arozarena for this because you kind of already laid out how he was sort of part of that trio of outfielders you were looking at.
Yeah. So when I looked at it going into things, a couple of names that I ended up with that were high on my bucket of list. Taj Bradley at $8. It's exactly the price that I had set for him. Because when I think about, and I put this in my article, Saris had a great note in his in an article a few weeks ago, and basically said that Taj Bradley's fastball trailed only Spencer Strider and Stuff Plus last year. And it's to me, if you've got that fastball and something else can come together. Last year I paid $2 to get Bradley, and I had to carry him all year, and it was disappointing. But I love bounce back guys, and yeah, it cost me a little bit more, but the stuff is there. And so it didn't surprise me that Pivetta and Bradley ended up on my roster, or Valdez. I mean, I said in my bold prediction series that Valdez was going to win the AL Cy Young this year. I believe he has the chance to do that with the offense support that he's going to have. And he has been anchoring a lot of my staff. So those three pitchers didn't surprise me that they would end up on my roster. But offensively, I would say Heim and Rizzo would be like, yeah, it's no surprise that they've ended up on my team. Because I have found in draft season, I found Heim to be sliding a lot for catching, and I don't really understand it. I know he drove in 90-something runs last year, and he overperformed with runners in scoring position, and that's going to come back down. But he could still drive in 60 to 70, and he's going to be back there 5 days a week because he's such a weapon behind the plate as well. And he's still an above average offensive catcher. And I was hoping to get him a little, I had budgeted 14. That's exactly what I had to pay for him. But during draft season, I found him to be an extreme bargain, and I kept picking him up everywhere. And I was hoping maybe I could get him 12, 11 in this room, but that didn't happen.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That you're that in on Taj Bradley, because he's someone I get asked about a ton, because everyone's just kind of like, is the price worth it? Because he's obviously going at a bit of a discount, but he's not going so late that you're not kind of relying on him. So yeah, he's really fascinating to me to try to figure out, because it does seem like the pieces are there for it to really explode if it clicks, but we just haven't quite seen it click with consistency yet.
I mean, you can look at it in the bucket like Ryan Pepio went $11, and I'd rather take Bradley with a year under his belt in the system than Pepio coming over and somebody they're obviously going to take a tweak at. In one league, in an 18-team league, I have Pivetta and I have Cutter Crawford. I have Cutter Crawford at $8. Bradley and Crawford were in that bucket of, I want one of these guys because I think their skills and their upside are similar. Let me see which one I can get. And I believe that Crawford went after. Yeah, I think he went before, and I didn't want to go to 9. Like I had this is an $8 roster spot, and I was like, no, I really don't want to go up any higher. And so that's where things were when I looked at it. And I think they were pretty close. But again, I had them in a bucket. I would really like to have, they were 2 of about 4 pitchers I had bucketed there.
Yeah, Cutter Crawford only going for 8 here. He's a guy that seems to be going higher and higher in redraft leagues. But yeah, I mean, we'll see how it works out. We're going to talk more about some Rays players with Jason. I also want to get Jason's take on just the method for nominating players in an auction, if there's any sort of strategies he goes to for that. But first, a message from our sponsor, Fantrax. Fantrax is sponsoring the pod all spring, and for good reason, because that is the best site to play Dynasty Baseball at. And you can move your sites from a worse or your leagues from a worse site to Fantrax. They'll do that for you. It's really, many fewer headaches if you're the commissioner, many fewer emails that you have to check if you're the commissioner, and all the players in your league will really enjoy playing on Fantrax because they don't have to be constantly sending you emails about which players they want to add. And sign up for free today on Fantrax and be entered to win an official MLB signed jersey from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Simply go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. That's fantrax.com/Fantrax. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, really would appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel, like the videos if you're enjoying them. That really helps us out a lot. And if you want to come hang out in the Discord room and you have a RotoWire subscription, just rotowire.com/chat. And you can get in there and talk to people like Jason, Collette, and myself. All right. So, Jason, was there a method for you for like which players you're nominating in this type of an auction? Does that method kind of change as the auction goes on?
Yeah, it does. I don't want to get into I don't want to get into the like reputation. Like Jason only throws the guys that he likes. I never want to be in that bucket. So I do like to throw some different curveballs. I will do things if somebody else, if I see like we're on this closer run of nominations, I'll throw another closer. If I'm looking at a pool, like, okay, I want to get if I keep going back to the trio of outfielders, let's throw one of these guys out and see what the price is, type of thing. And maybe I will throw out the lowest guy. And if the lowest guy goes higher, I'm like, oh crap, I need to make an adjustment, that type of situation. So I don't always throw out A, the guy I like, or B, the best guy at the dollar slot that I'm looking to fill. But I do like to mix things up. If we've seen two catchers, sure, I'll throw another catcher out. Let's go ahead and do that. But I would say probably if I go back and look at nominations, I probably ended up with about 4 or 5 of guys that I nominated. And I think those were in the end game when I had a little more money to do some things. But I usually try to avoid just throwing out guys that I want because, as you can see, I'm a known Yankee and Red Sox hater, but I have a few Yankee and Red Sox on my team. So I'll take anybody at the right price. So we'll see. I just like to see what gets out there. But I know some people just like throwing out, like Lenny Melnick used to throw out closer after closer after closer. And one year I went into the draft and I threw out utility guy until I picked up one. So I was just like, I was in this draft, I was just throwing UT only guys when that used to be a bigger thing with that. But at the end of the day, it's like I'm trying. There's some strategy behind it. You want to look at to see if your dollar values are in the ballpark, and if you see a few guys going, you're throwing some guys out, and you're like, "Ooh, that went a lot more than I thought it would." Then you have to have a moment of panic. You don't have too much time to adjust that in the auction. You have to think like, okay, I've seen 4 straight guys go for $4+ over what I had projected them for. So either 4 teams are going super aggressive on hitting, or I have a bad set of projections that I've put together and I'm in trouble. One of those things.
Yeah, I'm always, I definitely think I have a long ways to go as in terms of like nomination strategy. The one trick that I think is, kind of easy to pull off is, like if you're looking for 2 closers and you've already got your 2, you could throw, the next most expensive closer and try to get money off the board that way. I've seen an only league, it's sort of, maybe you don't know if you want 1.5. I mean, you're probably not going to pay for 2 good ones, but like you maybe don't know necessarily what you're doing there. But, you could maybe, like I paid for 2 really expensive catchers. I could have maybe been nominating other expensive catchers after that for $1 just to get that money out there.
Yeah, but then there was at one point, like Todd had 2 catchers. He spent $31 on catchers, and at one point he threw a 3rd catcher, and I wanted to yell at the room, "Stop! Make him fill his utility with a 3rd catcher." But it would have been, and that's kind of the game of chicken that you play. It's like, okay, fine, I'm going to throw, like you've got Rutschman, you've got Naylor at $43, and maybe you throw a Austin Wells. The room says, okay, fine. We just filled up James's utility spot with 3 catchers. It's like there are worse crimes, honestly. But if you got to be careful when you do something like that, because if you're going to throw somebody, make sure it's somebody that the room's not going to let go for 2. But if you go out there and throw I'm trying to look at a cheap catcher that went like Christian Vasquez, you throw him for $1, you may get stuck with him at $1.
Right. Yeah. And I would not have even had the stones to throw Austin Wells because part of the reason I spent so much on catchers because I think it just falls off a massive cliff. So, I think maybe it would have been, a Garver, or a Heim, or, Kirk or someone like that. Right. I would have been comfortable, throwing. But yeah, and then you can always trade too. But if you're the guy that leaves the auction with 3 catchers, you're not going to be able to get full price and trade for whichever.
I mean, and then the other thing is people will say, "Oh, I'll just like throw favorites. Like I'll just nominate Rays and have Jason bid." But yeah, sure, I'll take anybody from my favorite team, but you don't know the price I'm willing to pay. And I could the fact that Gleyber Torres ended up on Rick and Glenn's team for $26, not a surprise. Glenn loves Gleyber Torres, but we don't know what price he loves him at. And I could have said 27, and then they would have been like, fine, Like you have to be comfortable where you're at and pushing things. And conversely, Todd Zola loves Von Grissom. I know he loves Von Grissom. And I think I pushed $4 extra out of him because I was like, okay, I'll take, because I was, I think that's before I had Story on my, so I was like, I had a $16 infield spot. I'll say 17 and or I'll say 16. He said 17. I may have said 18 because I knew, or somebody else did, but I knew he liked him. And so everybody, who publishes, there's certain guys that they like and you can push, but I'm also a big fan of having the screen up on, if you can have a second monitor. I invested and found a great deal for $70 for a secondary portable monitor for my laptop. And so I could see the draft board and I could see what positions. I'm like, okay, this team's got a lot of money and they need something at this spot. Let me go find this and throw that out. So that's always another strategy to use as well.
Yeah, the Von Grissom thing did not work out that great for Todd. I feel bad for him about that. Just the fact I think that news, I don't think we knew that he was in jeopardy of missing opening day. I think we got that news that he could miss opening day the day after the auction. So
it happens. Last year I drafted Michael Garcia as my middle infielder. He got sent down. And the fact that he got sent down allowed me to fab Mauricio Dubon, who was a nice contributor to my team last year. And then when Garcia came back up and did what he did, I was able to move Dubon to the outfield to fill in that hole that I created when I cut McCormick when he was just riding the bench.
Yeah, last year, I mean, this was so last year would have been my second year in AL LABR, and man, a ton of talent came up through waivers. Like that has to be the year where the most talent came up since you've been doing it. I mean, just ridiculous.
Oh, it was insane. I mean, Willie Castro came up and nobody bid on him. Like he was a secondary bid. I needed a corner infielder. I had Isaiah kind of Falefa because he was playing more at the time. And then I had Castro as my secondary bid. I won kind of Falefa. Nobody bid on Castro. And then the next week he steals like 3. Ian Kahn buys them and then gets 30 steals out of Willie Castro from the free agent, which was huge. I mean, it didn't matter for Ian's team. He had a bad year with a lot of other injuries, but the fact that you could get somebody that stole 30 plus bases off the waiver wire in an AL only league was tremendous.
Yeah. And just like I added like Brian Wu and Cole Reagans just in season. Like I really don't think that level of talent is going to come through this year. I could be wrong about that, but I think we combed things over pretty well in the reserve rounds, and there will inevitably be some guys who come up and require significant bids. But did like the flood of talent, did that impact your planning at all this year? Like, or are you kind of aligned with me and thinking that was just kind of an aberration of a year?
I'm with you. I just thought it was an aberration of a year that we had a lot of talent come up. And like you said, and when we look at the reserve rounds, a lot of teams took some specs on guys like Chase DeLauder was taken by one of the teams here. I was trying to look by Chris Clegg. So it's like we've seen some other guys, potential impact bats and arms that went here in the reserves. And for listeners who don't know, in LABR, the reserves are truly reserves. You can only promote them from the reserves to replace somebody in the active roster who has been demoted to the minors, who is on the IL, or you have cut that player to free up that spot. There is no just, hey, I want to bench a guy because he's on a cold streak. You got to play him. And so these reserves are valuable. And that's like I took 3 batters and 3 pitchers to give me some up down if let's be real, when pitching injuries happen, because nobody gets through a season without them. And then I got a corner infielder, a middle infielder, and an outfielder as my bats, 2 of which have never had a major league at bat. So I may not be able to use them for a little bit. So I may be active on the free agent wire, but I can't expect to find a Dubon or a Reagans or a Brian Wu, that type of talent. I doubt that those will be precipitating down as frequently as they were last year.
Yeah, and that aspect of not being able to take a player out of your lineup, that definitely kind of narrows at least my starting pitcher pool for this league. Obviously he's hurt now, and didn't look good, but like say like Alek Manoah had been like fully healthy. Like I like Alek Manoah, healthy Alek Manoah as a dirt cheap flyer in other leagues, but not in this league where I'm just stuck with him in there. And kind of same thing with some of the like Red Sox pitchers that like Lucas Giolito, obviously that's not going to look like a good buy now, but like I wasn't drafting Lucas Giolito in this league just because I have no idea what Lucas Giolito was going to look like with the Red Sox. So we already kind of talked about your Taj Bradley buy for $8. You do follow the Rays very closely. I was really interested in your Ahmed Rosario purchase for $9. I had been hoping that he would land in a situation like this, and he obviously went to Driveline, and I've heard that he did well there in terms of upping his exit velocity numbers. But it just I love the dual eligibility, second base, shortstop. Wasn't that long ago that you were drafting this guy like right in the middle of mixed league drafts for the speed, the batting average and stuff. But there's a lot of people that love other infielders that they have. Jose Caballero has his fans. So how exactly do you sort of see the playing time shaking out for Ahmed Rosario in Tampa?
So for Rosario, the dual eligibility was a big thing for me. The fact that you may not be able to put somebody on the bench, but to be able to move things around the lineup obviously gives you some flexibility at fab time, which is a strength in an AL only. And so I have him and I have Castro, so it gives me two players that I'll be able to move around at two different positions. And Rosario is going to add outfield eligibility during the season as well, because he's already playing outfield in spring training. And that's one of the things, not that I expect Josh Lowe to be platoon strictly, but there are some times when it makes sense to give Josh Lowe a day off. And this hip injury, because he still hasn't taken the field in spring training action yet, but it may make some sense early on to ease him into it. And so you can see Rosario getting some time in right field and getting that eligibility rather quickly. So honestly, that's what my goal there was. It was, would like to get another flexible guy. And usually in the draft software, I have a flag and I will set guys. I have the label's called Swiss. And it's just, I label all those guys so I see who's left and who I can get. But I'd like to have at least two players that I can move around the multiple spots with him. So again, I look at him, not that I'm comparing him to Ben Zobrist, but if you think back to the Ben Zobrist and the Joey Wendell utilization types, where they played some thirds, some seconds, some short, some outfield, everywhere, that's how I view Ahmed Rosario this year. And, I feel that double-digit speed is there, and there may be even double-digit home runs again. So we shall see what happened. But, the marketplace as a whole, the real marketplace, really didn't like him that well because defensively he's taken a step back. But you can see what positioning and moving him around the field may help and see what comes out of it.
Yeah, I thought it was odd comparing his contract to Rosario's contract to what Isaiah Kiner-Falefa and like Whit Merrifield got. I guess obviously teams thought those guys were better, but yeah, it did seem like a good price for the Rays.
And Caballero went $9 as well. And when I saw, and I want to say Rosario and Caballero went close, and I would have taken either because they're both second base shortstop eligible, and I know they're on a team that's going to play them around. And both guys are good at single digit prices. If they get in the double digits, not so much to me, but I think $9 they have a good chance of earning that. And the other player I had that was Edward Julian, who went to Jesse Roach at 14. I know I was active in that because that was the guy that I had very high on my list for second base.
Yeah. So I'm actually working on this article right now where I'm trying to predict like when we see all the top prospects this year, and obviously had to cover Junior Caminero and Curtis Mead. And, it's just very easy to see how the Rays could go into the year with both those guys at AAA. Do you think it's like a Jonathan Aranda makes the team and those guys both go to AAA as like the domino effect there, or is it more complicated than that?
This is the real baseball fan talk in me. Jonathan Aranda is such a weird fit for this roster because he doesn't play defense. And this is a team that puts a premium on defense. And Jonathan Aranda is a terrible defender wherever you put him. I think in a perfect scenario, they find a trade partner and Aranda is off the team because again, he's limited in where you can play him. The bat, he's hit well in Durham, but honestly, a lot of people, Durham's a very friendly offensive environment. And we've seen a lot of guys like Vidal Brujan had great numbers in AAA and has yet to show anything at the major league level. Now he's Miami's issue with that. So Aranda's a bad fit. Harold Ramirez similarly, but Harold Ramirez is one of those dudes who's awesome in the clubhouse. He's dropped 15 pounds here. He's trying to show that he's got some utility in the field. But to me, I could see Aranda and Ramirez being the first two guys off this roster in some direction, freeing up that time for Caminero and Meade. But I agree with you that Meade and Caminero are more likely to open the season in Durham, but I don't imagine they're going to be down there too long. You just got to see how the rest of spring training plays out. If some of these teams dealing with injuries or whatnot, that some kind of deal happens. But for a team that values defense, to have two guys that are limited defensively on the roster is just a bit weird.
Yeah, it's kind of almost a similar situation that the Orioles are in, where they have like Ryan O'Hearn kind of penciled in, but he's also just kind of a guy where it's like, I know they don't want to like just give him away for nothing, and they probably don't want to send him to AAA, but you have younger guys who are just going to be better. So interesting situation there, because both teams are very smart. Both teams don't want to sell for. You always hear teams say like they don't want to sell for like 60 cents on the dollar, 70 cents on the dollar, but the market sometimes is just telling you that that's the price. There's not 4 quarters for the dollar.
Yeah. You want to be stubborn and hold on to two guys and limit yourself defensively, then do it. Like I said, it's Aranda's the one I feel that's going to be gone first. It's just a matter of trying to find, and they've played him at first base here in spring. Fangraphs has got him penciled in at DH. Can't hit lefties. So it's just it's a strong side platoon at DH for a guy that uses all fields and can turn on a mistake, but it's just a weird fit. And I thought he would be traded in the offseason, but I still have hope that he finds a job elsewhere. And because I like having bench flexibility with my real team. And I'd like to see the upside of Meade. Meade can hit, and you'll remember like a year and a half ago, the whole Curtis Meade for Christopher Sanchez trade looked so lopsided for Tampa Bay. And now it's like maybe Tampa Bay would love to have that one over, because Christopher Sanchez would look great on this team right now. And Christopher Sanchez is shoving for the Phillies, and Curtis Meade struggling to make the opening day roster here because he has options, and that's a sin.
Yeah. I mean, it might not look bad at all for them if they just had an endless runway for Curtis Meade to play, but as things stand. So I got Richie Palacios, new Tampa Bay Ray outfielder in the reserve round. And I also I didn't go after him necessarily, but Johnny DeLuca is another guy, another outfielder they acquired this offseason who I really like. So it's just another situation where the Rays have a bunch of hitters I like, and I can't really figure out where they're going to play. But do you have a kind of a read on how they're going to use Palacios and DeLuca throughout the season?
Yeah, I believe you beat me to Palacios. That's really who I wanted as my first, because I think I picked 10th. And if you picked Palacios in the first, you would have beat me to him. Or I was hoping to get him on the flip around. I went with Florial as my first because he's out of options, and Cleveland's talking about Florial being the starting center fielder and displacing Miles Straw. And so I almost went with Florial in the end game. But then the other things came through. So I was like, okay, let's see if he's still sitting there in the reserves. I mean, Palacios is a guy they liked. You look at some of I forgot who wrote the piece at Fangraphs. For me, it was Ben Clemens. He was talking about there's a lot of similarities into what Palacios was doing last year as to what Isaac Paredes was doing from the right side. Not to say that Palacios is going to be like this, I'm going to pull everything type of thing, but there was some similar batted ball data and profile to Isaac Paredes. And so I would say for anybody listening, if you're an AL only league place, you should be on your radar for this. And DeLuca is going to move around. I mean, to me, DeLuca is a nice insurance policy for Jose Siri. Siri has said, I want to make more contact this year. Last year, I was trying to hit home runs, and this year I want to make more contact. We know he's an elite defender. We know the team is willing to carry an elite defender that can't hit because they had Kiermaier on this team for so long. But that said, Jose Siri was a dead zone towards the end of last year. And I know it's just like one game, but I went to the Friday game in Bradenton and saw him with a couple at bats, and he doesn't look like he's trying to make contact. It looked like the same old Jose Siri swinging from his heels. So DeLuca is a really good defender, can play all three positions. He's the new Manny Margot. They tried that with Margot last year, but Margot actually struggled in center field, which is why I believe that Jose Siri played more than he should have down the stretch. And if DeLuca shows he can hit a little more, we know he can play the defense, and it's a nicer insurance policy than Manny Margot was, because Margot had his struggles for the first time, really struggled to play the outfield last year, which was a strength for him. But last year was a struggle. So Minnesota fans, beware.
Yeah. I don't know how I'd feel about that if the Rays traded him and then the Dodgers traded him in the same offseason and you get stuck holding him. But the Jose Siri thing's interesting too. And didn't he say he wanted to steal more bases too?
That too. If the league changes the rules so he can steal first, he would be a first round pick.
Yeah. I mean, if you ask, there's so many outfielders in pro ball where if you asked them about how many stolen bases they want to have, they would give you a crazy number. And if you reported it, fantasy players would start freaking out. But I don't know. It's probably going to be more of the same from Siri, I would guess.
I would expect. I mean, the funny thing is, I know a lot of us have talked about the faults of sprint speed, but you look at Jose Siri. Jose Siri is like a 97th percentile sprint speed, and he stole 14 bases because he wasn't on base a lot, and he had like a 270 on base percentage. But then they didn't let him run that much to the bottom of the lineup. Then conversely, you got Kyle Tucker, whose sprint speed's in the 35th percentile, who's stealing 25 plus bases annually because he is on base more, and so he could use that. So, like I said, if Jose Siri could steal first base, his value goes up immensely. And he says he wants to make more contact, but he never has at any level. And the swing is, it is what it is. But the defense is what keeps him on the field, because it is elite defense. He can cover gap to gap like few guys in baseball.
So who's your most rostered Rays pitcher?
Most roster, honestly, I don't have that many. When I was looking through my player shares, and I was checking earlier today because somebody jumped me in TGFBI. Jeff Hoffman was the only guy I have on 100% of my teams, but somebody took him in the 27th round, 4 spots ahead of me, and I was bummed. So I don't think I have a Rays pitcher on more than one team. I know I don't have Bradley anywhere else. I think I may have one share of Eflin. I have one of Pepio. So like I have one here and there, but I don't have multiple guys. And I know I don't have multiple shares in the pen either. It's kind of been a little bit of that. Maybe people picking around me are like, oh, Colette's coming up. I got to take this guy now. I know Fairbanks has gone in front of me a couple of times, and that's okay because I wasn't looking to draft a closer there anyhow. But like I said, here in this league, Tyler Alexander, this was the first time he made an appearance on one of my teams. And I look at him as a potential Ryan Yarbrough type, where he comes in behind an opener and steals a bunch of bulk wins. Because what I like about him is he doesn't walk people. He's got the blueprint of like, hey, I want to throw stuff up high, throw stuff down low, expand the zone a little bit, kind of like Ryan Yarbrough. The late great Dave Wills would talk about Yarbrough's success. He had to be slippery within the strike zone, and that's pretty much what Alexander has to be, and that's why he made an appearance on my roster. I don't know how long he's going to stay, but I'd look at him if they use him as a multi-inning guy behind an opener. I feel that there's a chance for him to be a nice source of win, because last year, I think that's one of the other things you talked earlier about, the depth of free agent talent that came about. But the other thing we got spoiled with last year was middle reliever wins. We had like 8 or 9 guys went 8+ games. I mean, Colin Poche won 12 games and threw 60 innings. Ian Jabot was there. Mike Baumann was there.
Baumann.
Yeah, right. But that's not a sticky. Like those guys aren't doing that again. So the key is to find the next guy that can do that. And that's why you see Brock Stewart and Tyler Alexander on my roster here. And it's the first time they've been on either one, any of my teams. I haven't even been able to get them in a draft and hold. But I'm looking for the next guy that can be that. And these are two of the guys that I identified that are on competitive teams that are going to be playing close and late games that could have a factor later in games for wins.
Yeah, there's very few things in standard 5x5 that are more satisfying to me than just lucking into middle relief wins when you just have to plug a guy in because you don't have like 9 guys you really want to start. So you put in Mike Bauman and it's like, oh, he got another win. Like that's what it's all about for me. So I don't want to move to any of these like quality starts or any of these leagues. I want to
quality starts is dead now. I mean, it's truly
yeah.
it's truly dead. But I remember one of the things last week. I picked up Ian Hamilton in one of the scoring periods last year, and he got 2 wins. And I think he pitched 3 innings that week. I'm like, yes, that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. That's when you're running hot. Okay, Jason, anything we didn't touch on with this auction? I know you got. I did take. So you took Florial in the first in the reserve, and then I had the back-to-back picks, and I knew I was gonna have to tap Palacios there.
Okay, so yeah, I would have taken Palacios coming back because I think I alternated. Then I took Gregory Santos because I have Andres Munoz. So handcuffing your closer is not one thing, but when he's your only one at this point, because I did take Mason Miller. And I love watching Mason Miller pitch. I just fear that every pitch he throws could be his last one. And they've already said they want to ease him into the closer role. So right now, because Munoz is my only source of saves, I wanted to make sure I had the insurance policy there. So I have Santos because at the time we were drafting, we still didn't know what Matt Brash's situation was there. So I feel like, okay, I not that I have the Seattle bullpen on lockdown, but I got two of the better sources there, but I'm going to have to keep trolling for saves throughout the season because last year I lucked out. I had Romano and Fairbanks overperformed, and I think I finished first or second in saves by 1. So I had it last year, but so far this year I don't have that luxury unless Mason Miller makes it a point early on to get into the Oakland. I'm hoping for like 15-ish saves there. Trevor May saved 21 last year, so the 15 could happen.
Well, Jason, this has been a ton of fun. I think you probably executed your plan a bit better than I did as the reigning champ. So I wish you well in your defense of that crown. You can definitely follow all of Jason's work at rotowire.com/pod if you want to check that out. But really appreciate you joining me, man. This has been the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast brought to you by